Wolves and Wagers. I was thinking about it last night, Ryan. I got to give you a little love for having the Timberwolves number 2, and here's my reason why. There is a legit argument that this is the best team in Timberwolves franchise history, and for me to have them at number 4, with that being said, I just had a tough time with that. So I know we're going to dive into the Eastern Conference, but had to give you a little bit of love on putting the Wolves number 2 for that reason. But I think we should just jump right into it, right?
Yeah, we'll flash our props for the day below. Wolves are playing the Warriors again tonight. Nice Wally jersey you're rocking day, so we're excited for that. We're not going to deep dive into that episode or do a preview or anything because they just played the Warriors a day ago, 2 days ago, whatever. But we're going to hop right into this Eastern Conference power rankings. Right now, for me, undoubtedly, I got the Wizards at 15, especially after last night's performance. They're 2-8. They missed their last 10 field goals in the game, I believe, when they had like a 16-point lead and they ended up losing. Just Jordan Poole is your best player, Kyle Kuzma, whichever one you want to say is your best. Go ahead and take it. I'll stick them at 15.
Yeah, I mean, they've lost 7 out of their last 8, and they're 14 on my list. And the only reason they're 14 is because Tyus Jones, I think, is worth
That's
couple
respectable
wins on anybody's roster. But seriously, they're 15. I have no argument on that as well. 15 for me, and the Hornets might be a little higher on your list. I'm interested to look and see, but I got them 15 because outside of Melo, who's averaging, 21 and 8, I'm just not really impressed with this roster. But those two, you can have 14, 15. It doesn't matter to me, right?
Yeah, I got the Hornets at 14. I was kind of excited for them this year just because I'd like to see a healthy LaMelo Ball with some ball players around him. I was interested to see how the Brandon Miller fit would work. I still think they got an okay future, outlook long-term. But right now, they're just not playing that great ball. They're giving up 123 points a game. I think that's the most in the entire Eastern Conference, maybe even the most in the entire league. So that's just too many points. You can't be doing that and expect to be a good team. So we don't need to really talk about them more. 13, I got a team that we both really like. Now they're 2-9. I think they're better than what their record says they are, but it's the Pistons. Really like them, but 2-9 just isn't a good look.
Yeah, and I got the Pistons at 12, and this was the absolute highest that I could have them on my list. And we'll talk a little bit about my 13 after. But the reason why I got them ahead of the Bulls at 13 is because Jade Ivey and Jalen Duren have missed a little bit of time. And actually, my favorite player in this year's class is Marcus Sasser out of Houston. He dropped a 40-piece in Summer League. He's gotten some buckets for them so far. And then I'll talk a little bit about my number 13. It's the Bulls. Another loss. And I think it's come to the point where Levine's still worth something. DeMar DeRozan is still worth something. Nikola Vucevic is still worth something. Go get into next year's draft and go get an Isaiah Collier from USC and have that be your next D Rose and get your franchise excited again. And don't be this bottom-dwelling team that's hopefully going to win a play-in to get into the playoffs to lose 4-0 to some of these top teams in the Eastern Conference. So that's why I have the Bulls 13. They have more talent than the Pistons. No doubt they have 3 former All-Stars on their team. But just the way they're playing and where the franchise is at, that's why I have them at 13, right?
Yeah, they're my 12. They're 4-7, off to a slow start again this year. Undoubtedly, in my mind, they got to blow it up, right? Like you mentioned, trading the big 3. I also think trading a guy like Caruso could be profitable because he's absolutely worth a first-round pick to a contender. Shout out to KOT4Q. He was mentioning that in a video not too long ago. So I think they should just scrap it, acquire some picks, and say, you know what, we're just going to do a little reset here and go into a few-year rebuild and just totally restart because you're delaying the inevitable right now, employing those 3 guys in the same court. They're all, Zach LaVine's probably not past his prime per se, but the rest of them are getting a bit older. Just blow it up. So that's what the Bulls need to do. Now, this is where it gets interesting because 11 through 3 are pretty much separated by 1 game as far as record goes. So this is where Dalton and I have some variance in the power rankings, but it's exciting because it's really a gauntlet here through this stretch. So at 11, I have the Nets and they're 5-5 right now.
Yeah, and at 11, I think we'll kind of talk about our each ranking and give a little just talk about each team. But for me, the Magic right now could be as high as you want them, like you mentioned, but they're just kind of young. And Ben, Caro, and Franz, and with Fultz missing a little time, I think Wendell Carter has missed a little time as well. I got them at 11 right now, but they could easily jump some of these teams that I got in front of them, right?
Yeah, I love the Magic. I'll talk about them when they get into my power rankings because they're pretty high up there.
I
My
love it.
10 is going to be the Raptors. They're another team that it's kind of interesting to see what they're going to do. They're 500 right now. They're 5-5. I think Siakam is probably the one that gets moved, and OG Anunoby's been in trade talks for the last 2-3 years, it seems, and they want a ransom for him. I've heard they've been offered like 3 first-round picks in the past, and they didn't move off of him. So not sure if like they are or not. He's a free agent at the end of the year, unrestricted. So they got to make a decision. Are we going to extend him? Are we going to trade him? You can't let him walk and get nothing for him. I like Scotty Barnes as a ball player. He's not going to be the best player on a championship team, probably, but they do have some good things going for them. But I think they should kind of do a retooling. They don't necessarily need to rebuild, but just acquire some assets and evaluate in a couple of years to be your window to maybe start thinking about the playoffs again. So I got them at 10.
Yeah, and we're spot on with the Raptors, kind of like how we were spot on with the Clippers and the Pelicans. Some of these teams that are kind of in a weird spot where in the Raptors situation, they really don't have that alpha, in my opinion, with those 3 wings like you mentioned. But also, I really kind of like Grady Dick and Jalen McDaniels. Some nice pieces that they can probably build around a guy like Scotty and possibly OG if OG's on this roster long term. But we're spot on with the Raptors at 10, right? Agree with you on that.
Yeah, Hawks are my 9th. Moving on to the Hawks. I know they're a bit higher on your list, and that's no disrespect to them. They're 5-4, and they're actually a team. When I made my conference record predictions for like the regular season before the season started, I had the Hawks finishing 5th in the East. So I still believe in the Hawks long term. I really like their outlook for this year. But right now, I just have them at 9 because they're giving up too many points a game for me to have them much higher. Now, the offense is there as well to supplement it. And I like Trae Young. I like DeJounte Murray. I like some of their pieces like Jalen Johnson. They got some really good role players, DeAndre Hunter. Really big fans of what they're doing. But right now, they're slated 9th, but I'm sure they'll crawl up the rankings here. And there's really not much differential between them and some of the teams coming up as well.
Yeah. And my number 9 is the Pacers, and it's plain and simple, Halliburton. And that's why I don't think they can be any lower than 9 so far on this list. But outside of Halliburton, like this roster has still a lot of question marks. And I still am taking a guy like Tyrese Maxey, who just dropped a 50 piece against them, over Tyrese Halliburton all day, every day. We'll talk a little bit about Maxey later on in this episode, but I got the Pacers at 9, right?
I like the Pacers. They're not much higher for me. I'll talk about them in my number 7 spot, but first I'll mention the Cavs, who are my 8. They're 4-6. They're off to a weird start. They have obviously a lot of talent on the roster, and so I know they're higher on your list. They're probably higher on a lot of people's list. But for me, I just want to talk about the Rudy Gobert trade quick because obviously the package was way too much, but arguably, and I think undoubtedly as of now, what the Cavs gave up was much worse. Because for one, Donovan Mitchell might be leaving as soon as he can. Like, he doesn't sound like he wants to stay there long term. And they also gave up Lauri Markkanen, who's an all-star, all-NBA player last year, as well as the same amount of picks package as the Wolves. So Cavs are at 8 right now. They're not really clicking. I'm sure they'll figure it out and be a playoff team, but as of now, they haven't impressed me.
Yeah, and that's the Knicks at 8. Same exact thing. I think they're going to be a playoff team. I think they'll be in contention, but they're just not really clicking right now. They remind me of the Kings of the East. 2 teams that were top 5 in their conference last year, hoping to take that next step. Have just been off to slow starts, but I'm not really worried about them. Their top 9 players on their roster are all solid NBA players. But I got the Knicks currently 8 on my list, right?
Moving on to 7, like I mentioned before, the Pacers. I like them a lot. I'm a huge Tyrese Halliburton fan. If you guys haven't guessed by now, Dalton loves him a bucket getter. That's why he likes the Anthony Edwards of the world, the Tyrese Maxeys, the Kevin Martins of the world. But I just don't know what their ceiling is with Halliburton as your best player. To me, it kind of reminds me a lot of those younger Chris Paul teams where, yes, you have this incredible point guard who does everything for you, who can still score, right? It's not like they're averaging 15 points a game like the Steve Nashes. Shout out to Steve Nash. But I just don't know if you're going to win with that as your best player. So that really caps their ceiling. And they're also giving up 123 points a game. That doesn't help either. I wanted to put them higher on the list because they're 6-4, and I think they're 3rd in the East right now. and I get you're scoring 126 a game. That's just not a sustainable pace to me long term to be able to have continued success giving up that many points per game.
And before I get to my 7, I want to see the Pacers were 7, right? Before last night, the Sixers just took care of business and kind of showed that right now the Pacers might not be able to compete against a lot of those teams at the top. But let's be real. A lot of these teams 3 through or 4 through 11 are competing against probably the top dogs in the Eastern Conference. But my number 7 kind of falls in the same place as the Pacers. Bridges is nice, but can he be that alpha like an Anthony Edwards who can get you a home playoff series consistently? I don't know. And Cam Johnson and Cam Thomas have missed time, along with Claxton and Simmons, who has been on your card a lot this season. But I couldn't put the Nets much higher than 7 on my list, right?
Yeah, I like the Nets a lot. I know I had them at 11 and I didn't really talk about them much. But to me, they're in that same tier where it's just a weird situation, right? Like, are you going to compete? Do you want to tank? Are you just going to be a middle of the road team? Right now, that's where they're kind of slated as a middle of the road team. They got really good role players.
Exactly.
I agree with you. I don't think Bridges is good enough to be the alpha on like a real contending team, but he's a very valuable piece on contenders. And so I wonder if they will accept the 4 first-round picks that they'll be offered for him, because they turned that down from Memphis at the deadline last year.
Yo.
I'm sure they can get that same offer for him again, and I wonder if they take it this time and kind of realize they need to get out of that middle tier. But moving on to 6 for me, I have the Knicks. 5-5, they haven't really impressed me this year, but when I was looking at their underlying numbers, pretty good. They're only giving up 104 points a game. That's Tibbs-esque right there, Tibbs to a T. They're going to play good defense. He loves a guy like Jalen Brunson, right, who can really dig in on the defensive end, but provide most of your offense as well. Julius Randle off to a slower start, but he's starting to pick it up a bit now as far as the field goal percentage goes. And I want to give some love to RJ Barrett, because I think this has been his best year in the Bigs so far. I think he's shooting like 50% from 3 on the season. That lefty stroke is coming along. So they're starting to figure some things out, and they're going to be like last year where they're going to be a tough out.
Yeah, and so the Kings are 8 in the West. The Knicks are 8 in the East for me right now. Literally in 4 days, they could easily both be up to the 6th spot, and I have no complaints about that, just because of the talent and the rosters that they currently have. So love that from you, Rye. And my number 6 was a little bit of a stretch, and it's not because of Trae Young, right? Even though he's second in the NBA in assists, his shooting has been just a little subpar this year. But Murray, you look at his numbers, 22, 5.5, 4.5 on 50, 40, 80 shooting. I don't think we're talking about him possibly playing at an all NBA level. And then the other guy I'm just going to talk about briefly is their young stud, in my opinion, Jalen Johnson, averaging 14.2 points, 8.3 boards on 59% shooting. So I do have the Hawks at 6, but I think this is the highest that they will get all year, right? So I think they could kind of fall down my list and the Knicks could replace them, but I got them at 6 right now.
Yeah, shout out to the Hawks. We both mentioned Jalen Johnson really playing some good ball. I wish I had them higher as of now, and I do think they will. I'm kind of the opposite end of the coin, but as of now, it is harder to put them any higher than what we have them at. Yeah. My 5 is probably the surprise of the episode. The Orlando Magic in the 5th spot. 5-4 record, could be better, could be worse. It's better than a lot of teams in the East right now. Like we said, it's just a gauntlet, but they're giving up 106 points a game. So they're playing defense. Their numbers are good. That's kind of why I have them so high, is when I was looking at them from like an analytical standpoint. I like Paolo. I know we both disrespect him a bit this year as far as like gambling and stuff goes, but I like Paolo. I really like Suggs' resurgence, because he was looking like a guy who was probably headed out the door and traded for a couple seconds or something. But now he's having a really good year fitting in alongside of that. Cole Anthony off the bench. I love that. They got a really good 6th man there. Markelle Fultz, like you've said, has missed some time. Hopefully he can get healthy, because he plays good ball when he's out there, does some good things. Jonathan Isaac is out there again for the first time in 15 years, probably, it seems. But no, I like them a lot. And then obviously you got Franz Wagner and his brother, Mo. Shout out to Mo, I guess. But that's what I'll say about the Magic, is they just got a lot of young guys. So the variance is going to be high on them. But as of now, I'm going to put them at 5 and believe in the youth.
And I love it, because we enjoy watching them play hoops. They're a fun team to watch. And I could have them over every team on this list except my top 4. So even with the Cavs at number 5, you could easily put the Magic over them. With kind of how Darius Garland is shooting the rock right now, kind of like Trae, they're both not shooting very well. But then you also look at the Mitchell situation. You touched on it. do you think he could even be like an Allen Iverson where he carries you to a finals and then you just don't even have a chance? I don't think that's even his ceiling. So at some point, you're going to have to look at this Cavs team and kind of make a decision on, hey, are you going to be like the Wolves of the East, or are you going to be something else? Because a lot of people throw Donovan Mitchell in that same category with Anthony Edwards, and I do not. And I don't know if you do, but I do not. So that does not make them a top 4 in the Eastern Conference. And I don't know if they will be with some of these teams that I'm going to talk about, Rye.
I like Donovan Mitchell as a player, but to me, a lot of that can be empty calories as far as like, we know Anthony Edwards could go average over 30 if he wanted to. If he was on the Wizards, he'd probably be averaging 36 a game, like Prime Harden or something. But I just don't think Donovan Mitchell with the ball in his hands, shooting as many shots as he does, is necessarily the best combo for winning, right? I don't think that is. Just the way I think, right? Because of how some of these games, right? He's shooting 48% of the year, which actually surprised me because he's had multiple games this year where he's been like 7 of 21. Last night, I think he was 7 of 22, right? Just these really awful from the field percentages. But I've touched on the Cavs already, so I won't go into them too much more. But they do need to figure some things out over there, and hopefully they do for their sake. I got the Bucks at 4. Nice win last night for them. They're 6-4. Giannis and Dame still going to be a deadly combo come playoff time, and that's really the big thing with them. To me, they're kind of like the Suns of the East, right? Where who really cares what your record is? As soon as you get to the playoffs, you're going to have arguably the 2 best players on the court at all times until you get in those later rounds. Dame's got to pick it up a bit still. He's shooting 40% from the field. Still not worried about him. You look at his track record, he'll be fine.
Yeah, and I got the Bucks at 3. Giannis and Dame. Won't talk much more about the Bucks, surprisingly, even though they're obviously in finals contention every year with those 2 on their roster. But I really want to talk about Miami at number 4, and why I have them so high is I think Bam is playing at a borderline MVP level. I mean, you look at these numbers, right? 23.2 points, 10.4 boards, and 3.8 assists. So he's almost pulling in 4 assists as well on 53% shooting. Let's just rewind the clock 2 to 3 years ago. Bam was in the finals and DeAndre Ayton was in the finals. There was a legit argument on Ayton being better than Bam, and now move forward to this current time, and there is absolutely no argument. They're not even in the same stratosphere of talent 12 months later. So I got to give my love to Bam because there's no way I'm having the Heat lower than 4 on my list when he's playing at this level, right?
And they're my 3. They're high on this list, I get it, but they've won 5 in a row. And when you look at like power rankings, when you win a bunch of games in a row like that, you're going to climb up power rankings boards. They started the season really, really slow, but being on a 5-game win streak, you hit the nail on the head with Bam. Everything you said about him is true. I think he's the Heat's best player. Now come playoff time, playoff Jimmy, this, that, like I get it to a certain extent, but I think he's the most valuable player for the Heat right now, and he doesn't really take days off like Jimmy does. So hopefully Tyler Hero can heal that ankle soon enough, because I do think he's a big piece on the team, providing a lot of that scoring punch. But as of now, the Heat are playing some good ball, so I got them at 3. It's hard to have there's no power ranking list where 1 and 2 are any other way. I mean, you can maybe flip them around if you wanted to, but the top 2 teams by far in the East are the Celtics and the Sixers. I got the Celtics at 2, Sixers at 1. I believe you have that the same way. Celtics have, I think, the best net rating in the entire league at 13.7. Sixers aren't far behind at 11.3. Just so solid ball playing around right there.
Yeah, and I'll touch mostly on the Sixers, and the reason why I want to touch on them is Tyrese Maxey. I mean, when you look at Maxey and Embiid, it's starting to remind me a lot of Jamal Murray and Joker when they were starting to get things cooking. And that should scare a lot of the league, because it looks like they have a breath of fresh air without Ben Simmons and without James Harden. And I still think all day, every day, Joel Embiid is a top 5 player in this league. And Tyrese Maxey, if I'm taking him over a guy like Tyrese Halliburton, then you're pretty much saying he's a top 15 player in this league right now. And I know that's up for debate, and I'm open to it. I love those conversations. I love defending my scores. You know that. So the Celtics are the most talented team, in my opinion, in the whole entire NBA. But with how the 76ers are playing right now, I had to put them at number 1, right?
Yeah, shout out to Tyrese Maxey. I mean, there's a world where he's the second best player in the 2020 class. Nobody for us. I mean, you're asking 2 Timberwolves fans. You're not going to unseat Anthony Edwards, but Tyrese Maxey, I think as of now is like top 5 or 6 in the power rankings for MVP voting. Like now, there you got to take a grain of salt with that because I think Tobias Harris is 8, so that's just like a generation of having a good record on it, and it's early on, right? Like who was it a few years ago that I think Jakob Podol made it, or Pirtle, however you say his name, made an appearance on the MVP power rankings one time. But shout out to Maxey, love him as a scorer. I really wish the Wolves, that was a guy I wanted the Wolves to take in the later round. Can't be too upset about it because they took Jaden McDaniels, so it worked out for us in the end. But Tyrese Maxey, I mean, I think getting rid of Harden was the best thing they could have done. You're unleashing his full potential. You can have those two as a 1-2 punch. Maybe you go sell all those picks you got in the Harden trade and some of your future picks for a guy like Mikal Bridges and say, hey, come be our number 3, come play good defense, find our identity. And that would be a deadly, deadly roster. And he's from Philadelphia, so he'd probably be open to going there, even though they traded him on draft night. He wasn't too happy about that.
No, overall, right. I look at the top 4 of the Eastern Conference right now, and you can kind of move them around however you want to, but I think they're in their own tier, in my opinion. And then you look at 5 through 11, and you can even take it to 12 if you want to. If the Pistons start winning games, I think they have some talent to win games, but until I start seeing that, I can't put them in that tier. You can swap all of those teams. I have the Cavs at 5 based off all of their talent alone, but with how they've been playing and maybe possibly the problems with Mitchell, they could easily be below who I have 11th, the Orlando Magic, and who you have 5th on your Eastern Conference. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. Warriors, Wolves tonight. We won't do a lot more coverage on them, but is there anything else, Ryan, that you want to say before we end this episode?
No, just stay tuned for the next one. Not sure if it'll be a Wolves After Dark or some other NBA content, but we appreciate you guys as always for tuning in, and thanks for watching this whole video.